Welcome to Ypres, 1918, where the air itself turned into a weapon. At first, it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes men nervous because silence never lasts long in a war like this. The trench smelled of oil and wet wool, gunmetal and rot. Men huddled under torn tarps, their faces hidden in shadows, the dawn light still crawling across the mud. And then someone whispered, "The wind's changing." That's all it took. One line. The kind of sentence that meant everything. Within seconds, the horizon shifted. A strange, pale mist began to roll in from the German line. Not smoke, not fog. Something thicker, heavier, alive. It crept low, hugging the ground, sliding over corpses and sandbags, swallowing everything in its path. Gas, gas. The shout cut through the stillness like lightning. Dozens of soldiers lunged for their masks, fumbling straps with trembling hands, lungs already burning from the first invisible taste. The hiss was everywhere, shells bursting vents, opening, the sound of air being turned inside out. Imagine it, the sound of 1,000 men trying not to breathe. Every breath was betrayal. Every inhale a gamble between life and death. The scene slows. You see them now, the forgotten faces beneath the masks. Rubber sealed to flesh, eyes wide behind fogged glass lenses, mouths twisting as the filters clogged. Some tried to speak, no sound came out. Some tore their masks off mid-panic, clawing at their throats, coughing foam collapsing into mud that steamed from the poison. The color of death wasn't red that morning. It was yellow-green, glowing faintly in the rising sun. Chlorine gas mixed with phosgene, the perfect storm of science and cruelty. It burned the lungs, dissolved the eyes, and stripped the voice from anyone who dared scream. Those who survived would never smell spring air again without remembering the taste of acid. And above it all, silence again. Only the crackle of distant shells and the soft rasp of masks filtering breath. The air was moving slower now, curling like smoke over the trenches, as if death itself was curious. It drifted past the British line, past the Canadians, past the horses writhing in panic, their lungs bursting before their riders even noticed. No gunfire. No enemy charge. Just air that killed. In the distance, a camera lens captured a single image, men standing still, faces hidden, eyes like glass. The photo survived a century. The men did not. They were never named. Just Ypres, 1918, unidentified infantry. But look closely, and you can almost see it the moment humanity left their eyes. This is not just another battlefield story. This is where modern warfare changed its language. No longer the roar of cannons or the clash of steel, now it whispered, invisible, and slipped through lungs like a ghost. This is where science met war, and won. Official reports would later call it the successful deployment of gas operations. But soldiers called it something else the day the sky betrayed us. Some say the mist glowed faintly at night. That men who died still twitched in their masks hours later, as if trying to breathe the air they once trusted. Others said they could hear whispering in the fog, the wind carrying voices of those already gone. Folklore or trauma, no one could tell. But every survivor remembered that smell. It never left them, not in dreams. Not even decades later. You see, Ypres wasn't just another chapter in the Great War. It was the experiment that proved death no longer needed a bullet. It could come quietly, drift gently, and kill you while you stood still. And for the men trapped there, every breath became a prayer. They didn't ask to win, they just asked to breathe again. So before we begin this story, take a breath, slow, deep, and safe, because for them, even that was a luxury. Now, imagine losing it. Imagine the air turning against you. Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder with brothers in arms and realizing that the wind is your enemy. That's Ypres, 1918. That's where the war ended for thousands long before peace ever came. The forgotten faces beneath the masks, staring into a dawn that never came clean again. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me the exact moment you felt the air tighten in your chest. Because once you step into Ypres, once you hear the silence of the masks, you'll never breathe the same way again. The defenders of Ypres did not rest that April morning. For dawn in Flanders was never quiet. The air trembled with expectation, not of bullets, but of wind. Every soldier knew survival would not depend on speed or steel, but on how long they could hold their breath. The trenches were more than lines of earth. They were lungs carved into the soil, gasping with the men inside them. And as the mist thickened, as the horizon blurred, they felt it. The war had changed shape. What once came with fire and thunder now approached in silence, a silence that could kill. The engineers had worked for weeks reinforcing every dugout. Timber layered upon timber, sandbags stacked in walls 6 feet high. Ventilation shafts dug deep to push stale air out, though everyone knew it was futile. Once the gas came, it would find every crack, every heartbeat. Filters were distributed, masks inspected twice each night. Yet no one trusted them. Rubber seams tore easily, straps snapped under pressure, lenses fogged at the first breath. Every man learned the same prayer, that when the cylinders opened, the wind would favor them. Reports from the British Second Army detailed the scene in cold precision. 9,000 men along a 6-mile front supplied with 18-pounder field guns, 4-inch mortars, and experimental gas alarms. Trenches mapped with mathematical accuracy. Yards between front and reserve lines. Dugouts reinforced with corrugated iron and hardwood beams. Each position labeled and logged by engineers of the Royal Corps. Condition moderate, morale steady, the reports read. But no metric measured the weight of dread. Not one accounted for how men flinched at the mere whisper of wind against wire. In a diary recovered after the war, Private Arthur Hensley wrote, "We lived by the air. We feared the air. Every gust was a warning, every breeze a messenger." He described mornings where fog clung to the ground like smoke that refused to rise. Evenings where the sunset glowed green, as if the world itself was exhaling poison. Such details, poetic in hindsight, were survival at the time, a catalogue of instinct, of breath counted and rationed as carefully as ammunition. Across the lines, German units under the Fourth Army prepared their release. 6,000 canisters of chlorine and phosgene gas positioned along a 3-mile stretch near Langemarck. Chemical officers checked wind gauges every hour east by southeast. Steady, the logs recorded. At 0400 they opened the valves. The sound was faint, almost tender, like steam escaping a kettle. Within minutes, the gas began its slow, deliberate crawl across no man's land. Not charging, but gliding. A curtain of death stitched from the threads of air itself. Eyewitness accounts from both sides describe what followed. The mist thickened into color greenish-yellow, glowing faintly under the new sun. Birds vanished mid-flight, horses screamed and fell, and men clutched at their throats before the command. Masks on could even finish echoing. The first wave lasted only 10 minutes, yet those 10 minutes stretched into eternity. One corporal remembered seeing his friend remove his mask for a single breath of real air and drop before finishing it. They said the gas burned not just lungs, but memory-erasing thought, until only pain remained. Official dispatches later listed casualties in numbers: 400 killed, incapacitated, 400 blinded temporarily. The precision of bureaucracy trying to measure the immeasurable. Commanders reported sector compromised by environmental conditions, a phrase so clinical it stripped the horror from its bones. But between the lines of those reports lay something else, the truth, that even the most disciplined army could not command the wind, that technology had outpaced mercy, and that in Ypres, Humanity was learning how easily breath could be weaponized. Yet amidst the fear, folklore began to take root, whispered from trench to trench as darkness fell. Men spoke of the yellow ghost, a spirit born from the breath of the dead drifting back each night to claim the ones who had cheated it that morning. They said the mist carried voices, that it moaned softly where the worst had died. Officers dismissed it as fatigue, but superstition worked where orders failed. Soldiers tightened their masks a little sooner, prayed a little longer, watched the horizon as if the fog could think. By nightfall, the gas had settled into the low ground, invisible now, but still deadly. Patrols moved cautiously, bayonets raised, not against men, but against air. Medics crawled through trenches marked by chalk signs, still poisoned, do not enter. The moon reflected off puddles slick with oil and tears, the ground breathing in and out like something alive. No one spoke of victory, only of survival, only of mourning. And somewhere between that poisoned dawn and the long night that followed, Ypres exhaled again. The land weary, the men hollow, the sky indifferent. And though the gas would fade by morning, its ghost would remain in lungs, in dreams, in history itself. A reminder that in 1918 the air had turned against the living, and no soldier would ever breathe without memory again. The faces of Ypres were hidden behind glass and rubber. Eyes fogged, mouths sealed, breath reduced to a machine's rhythm. The soldiers no longer spoke in voices, only in gestures, a nod, a hand on a shoulder, the silent language of survival. They had become shadows of themselves, men carved into silhouettes by fear and smoke. And beneath every mask was the same thought, unspoken, but shared. How long until the air remembers mercy again? Private Arthur Hensley crouched low in the trench, his hands trembling as he checked the straps of his mask for the 100th time. He could feel the damp cloth pressing against his skin, smell the rubber, and the faint metallic tang that never left the air. Somewhere nearby, a rat scurried across a corpse unafraid. The gas didn't care about rank or courage. It simply found lungs and filled them. Hensley looked down at the mud, thick and alive, and whispered, "I don't want to die breathing like this." Sergeant Ellis moved along the line. His voice muffled his words, barely audible through the filter. "Stay low. Breathe slow." Instructions that had become prayers. He had survived 2 gas attacks before, had seen what happened when the mask failed. Faces, swollen eyes, blind bodies convulsing, until stillness came like grace. He thought himself hardened, but this morning felt different. The air was too quiet, too heavy, as if it was listening. Then the hiss began. It was soft like the whisper of rain against canvas, but it carried something unnatural, a vibration that crawled into the bones. The soldiers froze, every head turning east, and there it was, a low wave of mist rolling toward them, greenish gold under the rising sun. Someone shouted gas, and the trench erupted. Boots scraping rifles dropped, masks pulled over shaking faces. A single motion repeated hundreds of times, rehearsed yet desperate, and then silence again as the gas arrived. Inside the masks, the world shrank to breath and sound. Men heard only the rasp of filters, the drum of their own hearts, the faint gurgle of water beneath their feet. Visibility dropped to nothing. The trench became a tunnel of fog and fear. Hensley tried to see, but the lenses were clouded. He could barely make out the shape of Ellis moving ahead, his outline flickering like a shadow through smoke. Someone coughed, a sharp, wet sound that ended too quickly. Another voice whispered, "He's gone," but no one looked. Minutes stretched into eternity. The gas clung to the earth, refusing to move, unsettling into hollows and lungs alike. Every breath burned even through the mask, a sweetness that turned to pain. Ellis gripped the wall, feeling it tremble beneath him. The wood was soaked, the sandbags seeping poison. He reached down and found a body half buried in sludge, the man still kneeling, mask on eyes open but empty. Ellis closed them, though he wasn't sure why. Perhaps habit, perhaps respect, perhaps because he couldn't stand to see himself reflected there. At the back of the trench, a medic worked by touch, not sight. His hands were shaking, his breath shallow, but he kept moving, injecting atropine into arms that no longer moved, washing eyes that would never open again. He had trained to heal wounds he could see, not the kind that floated in the air. His gloves melted where the gas met moisture. His skin began to blister, but he didn't stop. He whispered, "Hold on, though, most of them were already gone." And in that moment he realized he couldn't remember any of their names. When the wind finally shifted, the fog began to thin. The survivors lifted their masks cautiously, blinking against the light that felt too bright, too clean. The air smelled of death and damp metal. They coughed until they bled, spitting into the mud that had become their graveyard. Hensley sat against the wall, his body shaking, his eyes red. The skin beneath his mask burned raw. Ellis found him there, still breathing, still holding a photo of a woman and a child, their faces untouched by gas, untouched by war. Night fell over the trenches like a curtain closing on a play that refused to end. The medics counted bodies, recorded names where they could tag the rest as unknown. The wind carried the faint hiss of leaking cylinders somewhere far off, a reminder that the air still wasn't safe. Men slept, sitting up, afraid to lie down, afraid to breathe too deeply. Some prayed, some cursed, most said nothing. Silence had become the only language the living shared with the dead. Years later, survivors would speak of that day in fragments, flashes of color, sound, sensation. One remembered the smell like burnt fruit, he said. Another remembered the way the gas shimmered, as if sunlight had turned cruel. Ellis never spoke of it at all, but those who served with him said he flinched at the sound of wind for the rest of his life. The war ended, but the breath of Ypres followed them home, invisible, persistent, alive. And in the official archives, their story was reduced to a sentence: casualties heavy, conditions unstable. No mention of names or fear or the way the light fell on their masks when dawn returned. No note about how the survivors trembled when the breeze touched their faces. No word for the moment when a soldier realized that the air once trusted could turn traitor. Only silence, the same silence that lingered over Ypres long after the war forgot their names. And somewhere beneath the layers of history and dust, one mask still lies buried in that soil. Its lenses cracked, its straps torn, its filter filled with mud, waiting for the day someone digs it up and holds it to the light. And in that reflection, perhaps the world will finally remember what it means to fear a single breath. By the end of April, Ypres was no longer a battle, it was a mirror. Both sides staring into the same poisoned air, seeing reflections of their own ruin. The Germans called the operation a technical victory. The British marked it as a temporary setback. Yet the maps barely changed. No land gained, no glory earned. Only the air itself claimed territory, now drifting freely between enemy lines, loyal to no flag, no anthem, no man. The reports arrived in neat stacks, typed, sealed, detached. 6,000 gas cylinders released. 200 tons of chlorine and phosgene measured, calculated, recorded. Every figure precise, every margin filled with notes from men who had never breathed the battlefield. One page read wind velocity steady at 5 mph, atmospheric density favorable. Another colder line beneath it. Human resistance approximately 4 minutes without mask. The numbers didn't tremble, but the hands that wrote them did. Across the front laboratories, replaced trenches as the true battleground. Scientists in Berlin and London compared barometric data, refining mixtures to cling longer, sink lower, burn deeper. New formulas created faster than antidotes could be found. The weapons were called improvements, the soldiers' subjects. Every breakthrough measured in the number of breaths stolen. Progress had become indistinguishable from cruelty. And yet even in precision, chaos ruled. The gas obeyed only the wind, shifting without reason, returning to its makers like an unfaithful creation. On the German line, officers watched in disbelief as their own fog rolled back toward them. Entire platoons disappeared into the haze they had unleashed. One commander's report read simply, "Forgive us, it came home." The air, indifferent, continued its slow dance, consuming without judgment. For the men trapped between science and sky, the world had lost its edges. The front was no longer a place, but a color, a dull, sickly yellow, where everything human dissolved. Rifles rusted in their hands. Voices cracked from filtered breath. Those who survived the first hours learned to fear stillness more than gunfire. The quiet after release, that was when the gas crept in deepest, unseen, unstoppable whispering through the earth like something ancient. In London, the War Office called it controlled escalation. In Berlin, they called it strategic evolution. But for the soldiers, it was simply survival, counted in seconds. Engineers improved masks, strengthened filters, adjusted valves. But each innovation arrived too late for someone. The cost of knowledge was measured in lungs. Every improvement was baptized in the breath of the dead. Letters home spoke of nightmares that didn't end at dawn. One medic wrote, "We treat men who are still alive, yet their lungs sound like paper burning." Another soldier confessed, "The war no longer kills, it waits. It watches us breathe." And still the orders continued: push forward, hold position, release again. Both sides trapped in a rhythm of repetition, neither willing to stop the music of destruction they had composed together. Folklore spread through the trenches like a second kind of smoke. Men spoke of the yellow angels, ghostly shapes walking through the mist, untouched, unseen, guiding the lost to safety or death. Some said they were hallucinations, the mind gasping for meaning in an air that no longer carried it. Others believed they were the souls of those already gone, walking back into the fog they had once feared. Even the skeptics whispered before sleep, just in case the air was listening. By summer, both armies were exhausted, not from battle, but from breathing. Gas masks became as vital as rifles, filters more precious than food. Soldiers refused to remove them, even to sleep, faces blistered, skin peeled where rubber had fused to flesh. They had become creatures of their own invention, half man, half machine, bound to a rhythm of artificial breath. The war had changed their anatomy. The lungs no longer belonged to God. The escalation continued in laboratories far from the front. Women in factories mixed chemicals without names, staining their fingers yellow with death's residue. Engineers tested delivery shells that could burst over cities, not just trenches. The war's horizon stretched beyond Europe, invisible, infinite. It was no longer about territory, but about capability. Whoever controlled the air controlled existence itself. Still, the soldiers of Ypres remained breathing, waiting, haunted. Every breeze carried memory. Every fog reminded them of faces lost behind masks. When the wind shifted suddenly, even months later, entire trenches froze in panic, instinct taking over where reason had long surrendered. "The air remembers," they said quietly, "and it always comes back." By the time the last gas shell fell in November, the battlefield had become a graveyard of breath. Grass would never grow right again, roots twisting through pockets of poison buried deep beneath the soil. Farmers decades later would still find masks fused to skulls, filters turned to stone relics of a time when air forgot to forgive. The scientists moved on to new formulas, new weapons, new names. The soldiers never did. In the official archives, Ypres was listed as strategically indecisive. But to those who lived it, it was the proof of humanity's final arrogance the moment man learned he could make the sky his accomplice. And somewhere in the distance, long after the guns fell silent, the wind still carried their echo, faint, hollow, eternal. A whisper through ruined trees and cratered fields. We fought the air, and the air won. When the gas finally thinned, Ypres did not breathe again, for the air was still heavy with what it had done. The mist drifted low, refusing to leave, clinging to the broken earth like a memory unwilling to fade. Every sound was distant, muffled, swallowed by a silence too vast to trust. Survivors moved through the haze as if underwater masks still strapped to their faces, afraid that if they removed them too soon the air would remember them. And above it all, the sky shone pale and indifferent light, touching death without judgment. Even sunlight felt guilty that day. The medics arrived at dusk, silent figures in white coats, faces hidden behind their own filters. They stepped carefully over bodies half submerged in the mud, noting the tags marking the nameless. They carried stretchers that were too few, morphine that was too little, hope that was already spent. Each breath through their masks sounded like penance, slow, labored, rhythmic. One nurse whispered, "They're still breathing," but the sound was only wind moving through filters that no longer had lungs behind them. The trench had become an organ that hummed with the echoes of the dead, and the living could only listen. Rain began to fall that night. Gentle at first, then steady, carrying with it the residue of what had happened. Droplets struck the gas-soaked ground and hissed like whispers from the soil itself. The men tilted their heads upward, some in prayer, others in defiance, waiting for the rain to wash away the invisible weight pressing against their chests. But the water burned. It stung eyes and skin. It blackened the puddles. It made the world taste of rust. One survivor wrote later, "It wasn't rain, it was the sky crying back what we gave it." And in that sentence lay the simplest truth the war had taught. By morning, the burial began. The ground was too wet, too soft, too poisoned, yet the shovels kept moving. They dug shallow graves because the air refused to let them dig deep. Men carried bodies with trembling hands, laying them down in rows that stretched farther than the horizon could hold. The chaplain spoke words that vanished into mist before they reached heaven. Every prayer sounded the same, broken, whispered, incomplete. One soldier removed his mask for a moment just to see the faces one last time. And he wept not from grief, but from the pain of breathing. In the hospitals behind the lines, the war continued quietly, mercilessly, inside the chests of the living. Men coughed blood until their throats tore open. Nurses moved from bed to bed with trembling hands, wiping faces they would never remember, writing names that no one would ever read again. Gas pneumonia, the doctors called it, though it was not a sickness, but a slow drowning from within. Every breath was a battle, every inhale a coin toss between survival and surrender. The smell of antiseptic could not mask the truth that death was still in the air, and it would not leave politely. Sergeant Ellis lay in one of those beds, staring at the ceiling that flickered with lamplight. His mask hung beside him, cracked, rusted, useless now. He could hear his own lungs whistle faintly, each exhale like the last sigh of a dying engine. He kept a photograph folded in his hand, a woman, a child, a small house untouched by war. He whispered something. Maybe her name, maybe nothing at all. The nurse leaned close but could not understand the words. Later she wrote in her diary, "He looked as though he was listening to something only he could hear." Perhaps he was. When the reports reached London, they came without emotion. Casualties heavy, objective maintained, enemy movement minimal. The War Office filed them neatly into drawers labeled Western Front. No mention of the men whose eyes had melted, whose lungs had turned to glass, whose last sight was the color of the air itself. In Berlin, similar reports were written equally calm, equally proud. Gas deployment successful. Enemy incapacitated. The languages differed, but the sentences meant the same. Both sides recorded victory, though neither side could breathe it. Years passed, but Ypres did not fade. The soil remained sour, the rain still carried traces of what it had once absorbed. Farmers returning after the war found strange patches where nothing grew, where grass turned yellow and died at the root. They said the ground was haunted not by spirits, but by the air itself. Children playing in the fields would sometimes find masks half buried in the dirt, their lenses cracked, their straps stiff with age. If they held them to their faces, they said they could smell something faint, sharp, metallic, the past breathing through them. Historians would later call Ypres a lesson, the birth of modern warfare, the proof of progress, the triumph of science over distance. They wrote of tactics of innovation, of the evolution of conflict. But those who were there called it something else entirely. They called it the day the air died. The moment man realized he could turn the invisible into a weapon. It was not war anymore, it was prophecy. And that prophecy would follow them home into dreams, into hospitals, into silence. When the armistice came in November, the bells rang across Europe. Crowds filled the streets, flags rose, and the world declared itself reborn. But the men of Ypres did not cheer, they exhaled. Slowly, painfully, as if releasing something that had been trapped for years. They walked through the noise of celebration, like ghosts through fog, their bodies home but their lungs still on the battlefield. Some wore masks long after they were safe, not from fear, but from habit. Others removed them and could not recognize the air anymore. They had survived, yes, but not completely. And so Ypres ended not with victory, but with revelation. That air, the very essence of life, could be corrupted by man's ambition. That survival was not strength, but endurance of memory. The world would breathe again, but never innocently. And those who once fought beneath the masks would live the rest of their lives with the same whisper echoing inside them. We fought the air, and the air won. The fields of Ypres are quiet now. But the quiet is not peace, it is remembrance. Every gust of wind that moves through the poppies carries something older than memory, something that once had weight and breath. The earth beneath is layered with bones, wires, and masks, remnants of a time when the world tried to teach itself how to kill invisibly. You can stand there on a spring morning, hear the birds, feel the sun, and still sense it, that faint pulse in the air, the ghost of what once was poison. And though a century has passed, the ground still exhales the truth. Slowly, endlessly. They say the soil of Flanders never forgets, that the rain which falls there still holds the bitterness of gas, that each blade of grass bends differently where death once lay thick. Farmers plowing their fields find relics that the earth refuses to keep buried. Rusted canisters, corroded shells, broken masks, whose lenses still catch light like eyes. Each discovery a reminder that what was unleashed here cannot be contained by time. One historian called it the archaeology of breath. Another simply wrote, "The air remembers," and both were right. In the town that rebuilt itself on the edge of ruin, the church bells ring each evening at 8 o'clock. The sound rolls across the flat plains, soft and low, echoing through the same valleys that once trembled under artillery fire. The locals call it the last post, not a song of triumph, but of release. When the notes fade, the silence feels alive, as if 1,000 lungs inhale together, waiting for what comes next. Tourists come from faraway, cameras in hand, unaware that the air they breathe once belonged to the dead. Inside the museums of Ypres, behind clean glass and white walls, the masks sit in rows, silent, identical, hollow. The metal filters darkened by age, the rubber hardened and cracked. Tags beneath them list model numbers, production years, chemical specifications. But the faces they once covered are gone. Sometimes when the light hits the glass just right, you can almost see the reflection of your own face inside your eyes where theirs once looked out. It's then you understand the cruel symmetry that these masks were not made for them alone. They were made for us, for the future they could not imagine. In letters preserved by families long after the war, words still tremble on paper gone yellow with time. "I hear the wind and I flinch," one soldier wrote. "I dream of breathing and wake up choking." Another wrote simply, "There are things you cannot see, but they live inside you anyway." Those letters are read aloud each November beneath gray skies and red poppies, not as history but as warning. The crowd falls silent when they are spoken, as if afraid that even now words might disturb the air too much. And maybe they're right to be afraid. Science moved forward. Of course it always does. New treaties were written, new weapons, forbidden new lines drawn. Yet the formulas born in Ypres were never forgotten, only rewritten. In laboratories decades later, under fluorescent light, men in clean white coats studied gas again now, for industry, for agriculture, for defense. They called it progress. They called it necessary. But somewhere deep down, the echo of Ypres lingered, reminding them that knowledge once weaponized never fully returns to innocence. And the same breath that gives life can always be turned against it. In 1939, 2 decades after the last shot was fired, Europe held its breath again. And the winds carried the same old whisper: chlorine, sulfur, ammonia. Old names, new forms. Ypres had been a beginning, not an end. Its poison did not die in the mud. It evolved. And in that evolution lay the truest tragedy, that men had not learned to fear what could not be seen, only how to use it better. As one historian said, "The ghosts of Ypres did not stay buried. They enlisted in every war that followed. But beyond the statistics and the ruins, something human remained. Something fragile, unkillable, unrecorded. In the cemeteries where white stones line up like breaths held too long, people still leave flowers, not bright but quiet. Violets, thistles, wild poppies, the kind that grow best in poisoned soil. Children run between the graves, laughing, their voices light, unaware that the air they fill is stitched with the size of history. And somehow that innocence feels like defiance, life growing exactly where life was once denied. At dawn, when the fog rolls across Flanders, it looks the same as it did a century ago. Low, slow, shimmering gold at the edges. If you stand still long enough, you might see shapes in it, silhouettes of men moving forward, rifles at their sides, masks glinting faintly in the half-light. They fade when you blink, but you can almost hear them. The sound of boots on wood, the whisper of breath through filters, the rhythm of 1,000 heartbeats trying to outlast silence. Some say it's imagination. Others say it's memory. Maybe it's both. The historians end their stories neatly, dates, outcomes, casualty counts. But the truth of Ypres does not fit inside a paragraph. It lingers in the pause between sentences, in the breath before speech. It lives in the way the wind shifts suddenly, the way the sky darkens before rain, the way people instinctively inhale before fear. For what happened here was not just war. It was a lesson written in air. And air once changed never forgets its shape. Even now, when the bells of Menin Gate toll each night, the sound rolls outward like breath leaving a body. Tourists lower their heads. Veterans close their eyes, and for a heartbeat, the whole town holds still. No one speaks, no one moves. It is not silence but communion, a shared inhale between the living and the dead. And when the last note fades, the wind returns, soft, familiar, infinite. The same wind that once killed, now carrying remembrance instead. And perhaps that is the echo that endures, that even after death claimed the air, life found a way to breathe through it again. That in the ruins of Ypres, humanity rediscovered its own fragility and called it peace. The poppies bloom because they must red as lungs, delicate as forgiveness, rising each year from soil that still remembers the taste of gas. They are proof that beauty can root itself in horror, that breath once stolen can be given back, quietly, slowly, endlessly. So when the mist settles over Flanders, and you stand among the graves, close your eyes for a moment. Breathe in, not deeply, but gently. Listen to the air, to its history, its rhythm, its weight. And know this, the men who once fought beneath their masks are still here, not as ghosts, but as air itself. Their final breath became part of the wind, and the wind, ever faithful, still carries their story. Across fields, across centuries, across every place where silence falls and breath becomes prayer. We fought the air, and the air won, but it learned to breathe again.